Good morning, and welcome to Session 1 of the 2020 Autism Hope Summit. My name is Rachel Corney, and I am a research assistant here at STAR, and I will be your moderator for this session. Please feel free to post any questions that you have by selecting the Ask a Question box at the bottom of your screen. This hour's presentation is titled Transition Services, Bridging the Gap Between Adolescence and Adulthood, and is presented by Lauren Haskins, a behavior analyst at the Virginia Institute of Autism. Lauren Haskins earned her master's degree in special education at George Mason University. She is a board-certified behavior analyst and teacher in the Commonwealth of Virginia. She currently serves as the Director of Adult Services at the Virginia Institute of Autism, where she teaches independent living skills and develops vocational training opportunities for teenagers and adults with developmental disabilities. Thanks for joining us today, Lauren. I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rachel. It's great to be presenting at the Hope Summit this year. And I want to say thanks to UVA and to STAR for inviting me. So today, like Rachel said, we're going to talk about transition services and bridging the gap between adolescence and adulthood. So let's get started. So as an overview, we'll start by reviewing some of the differences between special education services in schools and various service options for adults post-high school. We're going to discuss components of transition planning, including assessment, person-centered planning, and goal development. We will identify important components of a transition plan, including assessing for behavioral challenges, exploring inclusive opportunities, and implementing community-based instruction throughout the transition planning process. And we'll also review some local provider resources and helpful tips to remember throughout the transition process. All right, so many of us are probably familiar with special education services in the schools. I've worked as a special education teacher and a behavior analyst for a number of years, so this was definitely my comfort zone. So with special education services in schools, families make contact with the school division, so it's a single point of contact. All students have the right to access special education services after meeting specific eligibility criteria. And then they coordinate a team of professionals who provide different supports to help the students navigate the school system. So these may be professionals like teachers, speech therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, counselors, psychologists, social workers, behavior analysts, and a number of other professionals. And they also provide access to services throughout the age of 22 or when a student graduates from high school with a regular diploma. Adult services are a little trickier to navigate. So this is something that I've learned a lot as I am now working as the Director of Adult Services at VIA. So adults and or families typically need to initiate services with multiple organizations and agencies once they graduate from high school. Adults should identify their own path to access appropriate services. So this is going to look different for everybody. You might want to apply for different adult programs. So some examples might be day programs where individuals participate in a variety of enrichment activities, community outings, recreational activities throughout the day and learn new skills. It might be you need some support with personal care activities in the home. So there's agencies who will help provide staff for those. A similar type service may be respite support if care providers need additional help in the home. Those supports are available as well. And there's a number of other services under the adult programs options. Another route might be to pursue additional education. So some individuals may decide to go to college or pursue career or technical schools. Another route is to, start working and apply for jobs in an area of interest that you will hopefully have had some experience in. And then finally, a big part of that conversation is going to be deciding and planning where to live. Will the individual be living with parents or family members, living in a group home, or living independently or with some supports in their own apartment? So all of this is a lot to coordinate and could also have the potential to cost a lot of money. So one of the most important pieces of advice I can give as we're talking about navigating the transition planning process is to talk about the importance of applying and exploring the Medicaid waiver program if those are services the student may benefit from. So the importance of applying to these programs is to apply early and to stay on the wait list and stay active once you are on the wait list for the Developmental Disabilities Waiver Program. There are potential situations where students can age out of school services without getting their DD waiver. And so that's something that's really important to continue to talk about throughout the transition process. So I'm not going to be talking about any more of that here today, but there is a talk later today at the Hope Summit by John Santowski talking about taking the mystery, but not the frustration, out of Virginia's developmental disability waivers. And that is the next session at 11:45. All right, so we've talked about special education services and we've talked about adult services. So the question is, how are we going to bridge the gap between those two? And for that, that's where transition planning comes in. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So a broad definition of transition services includes a few things. First, it consists of a coordinated set of activities designed within a results-oriented process. It's focused on improving academic achievement and functional performance to facilitate movement from school to post-school activities. It is based on the individual student's needs, including their strengths, preferences, and interests. And it includes instruction, related services, community experiences, and the development of employment and other post-school adult living objectives. So the Individual with Disabilities Act from 2004 further defined the specific requirements of transition planning. So transition planning starts with the first individual education plan, or the first IEP, in place for a student at the age of 14. For some students, this means that it may be talked about when the individual is 13, if that's when their IEP meeting is scheduled for. And this sometimes surprises families who wonder why we're starting to talk about transition services to adulthood when their child is 13. You think we have plenty of time to figure that out. So the reason for this is so the team can help and have plenty of time to start planning the different steps that occur in order for the student to have a smooth transition from their school to other services post-high school. So another component of transition planning is that it creates measurable goals based on transition assessments. Goals are then created in the areas of training, education, employment, and independent living skills. And transition plans are reviewed and updated at annual IEP meetings until the age of 22, or when the student graduates with a regular diploma. When I think about transition planning, I think about this quote: if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. I think this applies to all individuals with disabilities. Everyone is unique in their own different ways, so it only makes sense that transition planning should be individualized for each student. All right, so one of the first things to think about when starting transition planning is to identify who will be part of the team. So members are selected based on the student's strengths, their interests, and their need for supports. May include some members of the IEP team, and it can also include other professionals who can help implement parts of the transition plan. And one thing to consider is inviting adult service providers who will be part of the individual's transition post high school to the meetings and the planning process once those individuals are identified. So here's some examples of potential members on a transition planning team. So first and foremost, the student should be part of the team and be involved to the extent that he or she wants to be. This could include being, leading a lot of the conversations and participating in other components throughout the process. Parents and guardians, as well as family members, are also important members of this team, as they'll be in supporting the individual throughout the process. The special education teacher is responsible for completing a number of activities throughout the transition planning. Inviting the school and/or community-based case manager to the meetings can be helpful, as well as job coaches, especially as you're starting to talk about future employment routes. General education teachers, as well as behavior analysts, are other members to invite. And there's a number of related service providers who could be really helpful as you talk about different areas of expertise in their fields. Psychologists are another example. And then vocational rehabilitation specialists are part of some of the services that are provided as in the adult world to work on job assessment and job training skills. And then finally, the team can be really created based on this, who's going to be best to support that individual student. So it can include a variety of other professionals or individuals who know the student well. All right, so after the team is identified, the next step is to conduct relevant transition planning assessments. So these will be individualized for each student. So here's some examples of informal assessments. First, we have interviews and questionnaires. So in those, you may ask open-ended questions about what the student wants to do after high school, where they want to work, where they want to live. You could also ask these questions to parents or other caregivers as to see what their vision for the student's life after high school will look like. Direct observations is another form of assessment that helps to identify the student's strengths as well as areas that need more support. And so these observations can be conducted in a variety of settings. So the schools, the community, job sites, or at home will help identify skills that may need to be taught in each of those settings throughout the transition planning process in order to build independence. Ecological assessments help identify requirements for the job and reasonable accommodations. So once a potential job is identified, you can review the different skills that are needed, the different safety measures, and then determine if the student is ready to start working at that site. For example, we have done some ecological assessments and realized that dogs are allowed in some of the job sites that we were exploring. And so that's a really important piece of information to know before having a student go there if they don't like being around animals. Another form of assessment is curriculum-based assessments. These assess skills within a particular curriculum. And so they could be related to a variety of topics that are important for the student to learn throughout the transition process related to employment, money skills, independent living, and can be individualized in that manner. Interest inventories and preference assessments also help identify preferred activities that could lead towards a job or new community activities. So for some individuals, identifying some of their favorite activities or how they like to spend their time. Do they like to be inside or outside? Do they like to be in quiet environments or loud environments? And what some of their particular interests are may help narrow in on some different job areas to explore to help determine what the student might be interested in doing as a career. And then transition inventories help identify the strengths and areas of need to the students as they go through the transition process. So this is an example of an interview or questionnaire. It's called the Student Dream Sheet, and it asks a lot of questions for the student to start thinking about what they might want to do after graduation. So some of the questions include, what do you want to do after graduation? How do you intend to continue learning after graduation? What type of things do you want to learn about? Where do you want the learning to occur? What type of job do you want now? What kind of job do you want when you graduate? As those two may be different. Where do you want to work? And what type of work schedule do you want? Do you want to work full-time, part-time, during the day? And so sometimes the students might not be able to answer all these questions or may not have thought about them. And so you can provide some different options and offer choices and give examples. I did this assessment with a student once, and he told me that he wanted to live in the same apartment complex as his mom, but in a separate apartment because he wanted to have a cat and she wouldn't let him have a cat in their house. So you learn all kinds of little unique pieces of information that might not come up on a daily basis by starting to ask some questions like this. This is another example of an open-ended questionnaire form. This is from I'm Determined, which is an organization in Virginia that promotes skills associated with self-determination. And so in this one is also open-ended. The individual can identify their strengths, their interests, their preferences, and their needs. And so a nice thing about a lot of these assessments is that they can be adapted to use text or pictures or a combination of the two in order to help support the best communication method for each individual student. And this is a nice one because it helps to start teaching the student to advocate for all of these things for themselves to work on that self-determination process. In addition to informal assessments, we also have formal transition assessments. And some of these include adaptive behavior and independent living assessments, intelligence tests, achievement tests, personality or preference tests, career development measures, and on-the-job evaluations. And also self-determination assessments. So self-determination assessments help to identify if a student is ready to complete self-determination activities like goal setting, talking about their self-confidence, self-advocacy skills, telling people what they want and what they need, as well as problem solving. So this is an example of a self-determination assessment by the American Institute of Research. In this form, the individual scores how much they agree with each statement. So for the section about things I do, they can score these statements. So I know what I need, what I like, and what I'm good at. Is that never almost never, sometimes, almost always, or always. I set goals to think about what I want or what I need. I figure out how to meet my goals. I begin working on my plans to meet my goals as soon as possible. And so there's a lot of common language in there related to goals. And then in the other section, it is asking questions about how the individual feels. So I feel good about what I like, what I want, and what I need to do. I believe that I can set goals to get what I want. I like to make plans to meet my goals, and I like to begin working on my goals right away. And so two organizations that I found really helpful when working on transition planning are INTACT, the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, as well as I'm Determined. So INTACT has a variety of resources related to transition planning as in addition to other topics. And one particular item, the Age-Appropriate Transition Assessment Toolkit, lists out a lot of information about the assessment process, provides different examples of all the different types of assessments, and is a great resource for educators when you're determining what types of assessments you may want to use with the students that you work with if you're conducting transition planning. I'm Determined also has a number of great assessment resources. They also have many resources related to self-determination, and they also host a conference for students each summer all about self-determination. I've heard rave reviews from individuals who have been to that conference. So another component of transition planning is person-centered planning. So we could probably talk about person-centered planning for a whole talk in and of itself. So these are some highlights about it. In person-centered planning, the student and important members of the student support network meet to discuss his or her goals for the future. So we create a vision, and that would be, what does the student want their future to look like? And so there's some questions to think about within this. Where will the student live? Will the student pursue any post-secondary education? Will the student have a job? And what activities make the student happy? And so within this category, it's really important to think about, who they like to be with, what type of leisure activities they enjoy, what types of settings they like to be in. And then when you are conducting person-centered planning, you can compare the future vision of what the student wants to do with their current skills and how they are in the present. And so from there, you can create an action plan and work towards how to go from the present to the future goals. And so one way that is a nice visual of thinking about this is this transition planning map. So this is a visual that could help the person-centered planning team identify different steps and goals for the student and what steps it will take to reach the future vision in each category. So we have the categories of work, academic, what types of learning they would like to work on, independent living, community, recreation and leisure skills, self-determination, as well as transition activities. And so if we are thinking about the student's future vision related to independent living, and let's say this student wants to live by himself when he's older and when he's graduated out of high school, he may need to learn to create or to complete a variety of different activities. So he may need to learn how to complete independent household chores, how to cook for himself, how to create a budget, how to visit different types of living situations so that he can decide what type of living arrangement he'd like to live in. He may need to decide which one of those options is right for him, and then take the necessary steps to apply for that living situation. And so if he were to wait to do all of these things until his last year of high school, when he's 21, 22, 18, whatever that may be, he would most likely not be able to get all of those things accomplished in that 1 year. So the nice thing about person-centered planning and this type of transition planning map is that you can identify smaller goals to work on each year in the planning process. And as long as you start planning in advance, this will help students identify which one of those smaller goals to complete each year in order to work towards the long-term vision that they may have in each one of these categories. After completing assessments in the person-centered planning process, the next step is to use that information to write transition goals. So when you write transition goals, we're going to write a long-term goal and a short-term goal in each one of these categories. And we've talked about these before, so they're continuing. The categories are training, education, employment, and independent living skills. So as an example, let's say a student has expressed interest in animals and wants to work part-time during, once they graduate from school. And so they've talked about this in the person-centered planning process. And the team has decided that, these two things might be a good thing to combine together. And the student has identified, they'd like to work and explore working in a setting that has animals. And so for a long-term goal, you may have something like this example. Ashley will work 20 hours a week at a job where she can interact with animals. And as a short-term goal, maybe this is 3 to 5 years before she expects to graduate from high school. The short-term goal could be Ashley will complete job training in 3 different jobs that interest her for 10 hours a week. And so having the opportunity to explore different types of jobs and some that are with animals and some that are not with animals and in a different area will help identify, is this really something that I want to keep as my long-term goal? And if not, then those goals and those future visions can continue to be updated and adjusted as the student continues to narrow in on what they want that future vision to look like. So the next step after creating transition goals is to develop IEP goals that support those transition goals. So what other goals should the student learn in order to work towards their transition goals? And so if we're thinking about Ashley and her desire to work in a setting with animals as a job, what other skills might be helpful for her to work on over the next few years as IEP goals? So if you're thinking about social skills, how does she interact with her coworkers when she's on the job training site? How does she interact with customers? Would IEP goals related to social skills, whether that be, greeting customers or having conversations with people or helping people find what they're looking for, would some of those skills be helpful to have as IEP goals to support that transition goal? Similarly, if you're thinking about, how the individual completes their work tasks, does Ashley follow a schedule or a list of activities? Does she work independently? And if so, for how long? She may need to build up her stamina to work for longer periods of time, or to work for longer periods of time without, a teacher or a job coach there to help complete some of those activities. And then a big piece of thinking about the future is transportation. How will the individual get from their home to their job site or to the gym or other recreational activities that they are participating in? And so does the individual live in an area where there's public transportation? If so, will they be using it? And if there's a chance that they may, then learning to navigate public transportation is definitely a great thing to work on as an IEP goal to support those transition goals. And so both transition goals and IEP goals are regularly evaluated for progress and updated annually. So they can always change, they can always be updated. And it's good to do that as the students, vision changes, or they realize, oh, I really like this, or I'd like to try this instead. Maybe I don't want to work with animals. I have a new idea now. After the transition goals are created, it's important that members of the transition team consider a few additional things while implementing the IEP and the transition goals. So first, if the individual engages in any challenging behaviors or disruptive behaviors, you would want to identify those and create a plan to address them. While implementing transition goals, it's a great time to explore different inclusive opportunities and also to provide a variety of community-based job and life experiences. So those skills can be taught in the natural setting. And then also one of the main goals of transition planning is to coordinate a smooth transition to new resources, new adult service providers, educational settings, or jobs, so that all of the skills that were worked on throughout the transition planning process are smoothly transitioned into the adult setting that the student transitions into. So when identifying if the student engages in any challenging or disruptive behaviors, it's good to think about how these behaviors may interfere with future transition plans. So for example, you could ask yourself, does the student's behavior limit his job success? Maybe he really wants to work in the food industry, but he needs to work on his hygiene skills, or he touches his hand to his mouth frequently. So even minor disruptive behaviors like that could limit success in certain areas of potential jobs in the future. Does the student's behavior impact his social relationships? Maybe the individual only talks about a handful of preferred topics. And so expanding upon those conversation topics, or teaching appropriate greeting skills, or how to introduce yourself to new people and listen to their interests would also be important to address. Does the student's behavior limit his independence? Does the individual, stay in the, the room or the building that they're supposed to be, or do they wander, out of the building without telling someone where they're going? That would really require someone to be with them more often and definitely limit their independence. And then, is the student's behavior potentially dangerous? If anything, if anyone is engaging in potentially dangerous, problem behavior, we would want to address that, early on and teach some alternative behaviors so that the individual can be more independent as they continue exploring different transition-related activities and new settings. So When addressing challenging or disruptive behavior, you want to talk with other members of the student's team if any of these potentially challenging or disruptive behaviors have been identified to determine next steps. And it's good to talk to the student whenever possible and get their thoughts on it and have them be involved in the planning of next steps. Teachers, behavior analysts, and other professionals who work with the student may also be helpful in determining next steps and if this is something that should be addressed further. So based on those conversations, the team may decide to conduct a functional behavior assessment to identify why the student engages in the behaviors. So they may do some observations in the settings that the student is engaging in the challenging behaviors, and talk to a few people and the student about why and what some of those triggers may be for that individual student. And then based on the results of the functional behavior assessment, the team may decide to develop a behavior support plan to teach and reinforce alternative behaviors instead of engaging in the challenging or disruptive behaviors. So it's really important to address these potentially challenging behaviors early on in the transition planning process, so there's time to create a successful plan and reinforce those alternative behaviors, with the ultimate goal of having the student be as independent as possible after graduation, so that they have as many opportunities as possible as they transition into adulthood. So while implementing transition planning activities, one good thing is to explore teaching IEP and transition related goals in an inclusive setting. So there's many benefits to learning in these settings. Some of these include providing opportunities to learn important skills from the class, improving communication skills by having a large number of peers to interact with, improving social skills, watching other individuals and how they interact, having peer models or peer mentors is a great way to work on social skills. Engaging with peers in an inclusive setting is definitely a benefit. Making personal choices during activities within the classroom helps with those self-advocacy and self-determination skills. And being a member of the classroom and a group of students provides a sense of community. When selecting an inclusive setting, you want to consider the student's interests, strengths, and weaknesses, and identify classes that will help the student work towards transition goals. So for example, I think a lot of times classes like art, music, and PE are frequently thought of as good inclusive opportunities to start providing different social interaction opportunities for students. And so this may be true for some of the students, but for others, these classrooms might be really loud, may lack the structure that a student really needs to be successful, and may involve a lot of students at one time. So a student may benefit from taking a different class that's more tailored towards some of their transition goals instead. So for example, if someone is interested in pursuing a job that requires computer skills, taking a class about computer skills may be a good fit for them. Within this class, they could have, shared interest in different, computer or video games, which may help to facilitate conversation topics with other students in the class and potentially help build friendships. And then as you're navigating, inclusive settings, you want to make sure that you find an appropriate balance between inclusive opportunities and individualized instruction for the students so that they're able to meet all of their goals. So community-based experiences are another important component to consider when implementing transition goals. So some examples of community-based experiences. They provide an opportunity to use previously learned skills in a new setting. They teach functional skills in a naturally occurring setting. So you're working on, job skills at the job instead of working on it in the classroom. You can teach community-based instruction, or you can increase, community-based instruction time each year, so that as the student progresses further into high school and the transition planning process, they have more experiences in the community. And these can include a variety of skills. So different vocational skills related to jobs, home living skills, community-based activities, going to, the movies or going shopping, recreational or leisure skills, going to exercise and going to group fitness classes. All of those things are potential opportunities. So as a first step, community-based instruction can take place in various school settings. So working in the school office could include greeting visitors, completing office work, making copies, doing some filing. Working in the cafeteria could include setting up the lunch tables, doing some cleaning, stocking materials to be ready for lunch. There's many jobs in the library that could involve things like reshelving books, checking out books for students, assisting the librarians with other projects. Working in the school store is a great way to help practice money skills, using a cash register, or even a tablet with a square these days, greeting customers. Working in the school garden or another outdoor activity could provide opportunities to practice skills outside if that's a setting that someone prefers, and doing things like yard work, weeding, planting different plants or vegetables, and then working in the nurse's office. Could also provide a number of jobs like stocking supplies, doing inventory, things like that. Community-based opportunities can also occur in a variety of community settings. So different vocational partnerships, different schools have partnered with different local businesses to create job sites or internship locations. Volunteer opportunities are a great way to work on these skills. There's plenty of local, food banks or different Meals on Wheels options, things like that, that would love to have volunteers. Going to gyms, going in and, working out independently or walking on the treadmill or going to a group dance class be a great way to spend some time in the community. Going to different restaurants, practicing ordering at a fast food restaurant is very different than going to a sit-down restaurant and ordering, waiting for your food, and interacting with the server. Different retail stores, going grocery shopping, shopping for clothes or different preferred personal items adds a lot of that choice making and self-advocacy skills into the mix. Going to different parks and walking trails are a great way to spend time in the community. And also continuing to talk about local transportation. What are all the different transportation options in your area? How do you schedule those rides if that's a choice, or where are the stops that you need to go to meet the bus? And what are the rules for riding the bus and knowing when to get off and get to your destination are all great skills to work on in community-based instruction. And so in order to coordinate a smooth transition to adult service providers, the transition planning team should also connect the student with local service agencies early in the transition planning process. So some examples include state vocational rehabilitation services. In our area, DARS helps individuals with disabilities find and keep jobs. Wilson Workforce and Rehabilitation Center provides vocational assessment and training. There is another panel discussion at the Hope Summit today at 1:30 about Virginia DARS services and special programs to support career pathway and achievement. Be a great one to check out. Local community service boards are an important connection to make early in the transition planning process if the student hasn't been connected with one of them yet. And so local community service boards provide case management services, coordinate the waiver system, provide support in navigating community living and employment services. And so it's really important to get connected, and each region has a different local community service board in Virginia. But once you're connected and you're on the waiver wait list and have initiated services that are appropriate for the student, you may have a case manager or someone else that you can ask for advice in order to help navigate the best ways to access the different services provided in our area. Some other resources include community rehabilitation programs like Virginia Access or the Centers of Independent Living. And they provide advocacy, peer counseling, independent living skills, information and referral services, and also some transition services. And personally, I'm really lucky and work on a transition team with a fantastic social worker. And when I asked her for advice about transition planning, she gave me some helpful tips that she shares with all of the students that she works with. So the first, I think I've said it probably 5 times already today, connect with your local community service board. They really assist with identifying appropriate services, providing directions on how to apply for the DD waiver. You want to apply early and complete all of the requirements to stay on the wait list once you are on the wait list. And they also provide case managers. And once you are, close to transition age and getting closer to graduating, it's great to check in with your case manager at that time as well, because they can check the priority status that you have on the wait list. And as you start getting closer to graduating and needing the services provided through the waiver, they may be able to increase your priority status. And that's really important to stay in touch with them about. Another important topic to think about as you're working through the transition planning process is guardianship. This is something to be thinking about ahead of time, but to review when the student turns 18. And so you want to think, can the individual manage his or her own personal affairs and money, or should a guardian be appointed to help with this in some way? And so the Virginia Institute of Autism is hosting a virtual meeting about guardianship and special needs trust in January of 2021. The date hasn't been set yet, but it will be shared on our Facebook page. And this is a great place to learn some information about guardianship as you start working towards that time in the transition planning process. A few other helpful tips is, thinking about what Social Security benefits the student may be eligible for once they turn 18. And you can make an appointment with Social Security to talk about those. And then finally, the Department of Social Services is another organization to make an appointment with to learn if the student qualifies for Medicaid or for any other public benefits after turning 18. All right, so I think we have some time for questions.
Yes, thank you so much for that great presentation, Lauren. We are going to open it up to questions from the audience. So the first question I'll ask you is, how are care teams communicating in this current virtual setting due to COVID?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know personally, we are living on Zoom and other digital platforms right now. And so I think a lot of that is a great way, because then you can still see people face to face and have those meetings. We've definitely still been having IEP meetings with a number of people on the team on the Zoom calls. And also I think phone calls, and emails are important to stay in touch as well.
Yeah, definitely. Another question that came in, my son has trouble motivating when it comes to engaging in vocational training and thinking about their future. Are there ways that you suggest you can help with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, my first kind of answer would probably be to look at topics that he may be interested in and areas that he might be interested in, and think if there's a way to focus on some of those as a potential route to explore, because I think anyone is a little bit more motivated, when it's something they want to do. So what are those special interests that he might have? And then depending on his age and what services he's providing, he may be qualified for services with different job coaches or through DARS, and they could help provide some supports and help with that motivation as well. Yeah,
motivation can always be a problem for everyone, so I think that's a very relevant question.
To get up and go to work every day.
Yeah, especially in these coronavirus times.
Mm-hmm.
One more, or I think we probably have time for a few more questions. So, can these transitional services be useful or used even after graduation or once a job has been acquired? So how long do you suggest people stay on these services?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, a lot of what I was talking about was transition services provided with the school system. And so, once you graduate, a lot of those resources may not be available and the people in your team may be different, but depending on what types of services you're receiving as an adult. If you're on any of the waiver systems, in the DD waiver specifically, that provides, a whole new group of people to be coordinated. And so the case manager becomes kind of that center feature of coordinating all of the different agencies and groups that are working with them. And we continue transition planning in a sense through a person-centered planning process, and have individual service plans instead of individual education plans. And if you're not on the waiver, I think it's just a matter of, getting that group of people together that know the individual well and, are willing to, have, share their expertise in the different areas. So if they have, a job that they're working at and they're, working on independent living skills, maybe it's a smaller group of people, but they could still meet and really focus on those goals and involve the individual in that process too.
Yeah. You also spoke a little bit about how, goals can change over time. So how do you work with a student to kind of readjust that goal?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, if it's this particular goal that they've expressed interest in, and maybe they've explored, some different career opportunities or, different community activities that have given them some experiences in that area. I think it's, maybe going back to some of those assessments or asking follow-up questions, and seeing like, hey, did you like, working at the farm this summer? Or did you like working at the pet store better? And I think those settings are very different once you get there and you're like, oh gosh, it's like 85 degrees outside at the farm in the summer, and maybe I want to be in the air conditioning instead. So I think a lot of it is those follow-up conversations and assessments with the individual.
Yeah, it's all a process, a learning process. So I think we have time for one more question. How do you suggest kind of like initiating these transitional services, and are they automatically available if the individual has an IEP?
Yes, so they are automatically available if they have an IEP. That's what is required as part of the IEP process at the age of 14. And so it's an extra part of each IEP meeting once you're 14 to review and talk about the transition goals in each one of those 4 categories that I talked about. And so a lot of that planning may need to happen before the IEP process or before the IEP meeting itself. So if that's not happening, maybe it's talking to the special education teacher or the LEA for that individual and deciding, how you can maybe go about that process a little differently.